One of the biggest challenges that we see, one of the biggest areas that companies let themselves down on, is a lack of consistency in their management and leadership teams. So one manager does it one way, another manager does it another way. So if I work for this manager, I don't get told off for that. If I work for that manager, I do. Then if you can link it to a protected characteristic, and it all goes crazy. So your challenge is to get your managers working fairly and consistently across the board and engaging their teams in a way that no matter where in your organisation somebody works, they are getting the same level of support and the same level of management, if that makes sense. And that is easier said than done. The other challenge that a lot of organisations face, and I'm not saying this is the wrong way to do it because I think there's a lot of merit in this, but a lot of organisations promote from within. Great. Tick in the box, succession plan and engagement, great. What they then do is take their best employee off their production line and go, right, now you're a manager. And don't recognise the fact that this person was the best employee at making that product. But management is a completely different job. It's a completely different set of skills. It's a completely different role profile. It's a completely different requirement. The context might still be the same, but the person needs to do different things. But we don't train them. So we throw them in at the deep end and then they fail. Okay? And then we get rid of them. Or we let them fail, continually fail, and we create a problem where there's no management within the organisation. Now the reality is, if that is the scenario, the failure is with the company, not with the person. Because we haven't trained them effectively and set them up for success. If you set them up for success and then they fail, and that's a different thing, that's a performance issue, that's something you deal with and you support them and you work with them on. But we've got to set them up for success in the first instance. So part of doing that is about the expectations that your managers set and that you set with your managers around what they do, to enable consistency, to enable fairness, and to enable an engaged and productive workforce. Okay? So, clarity of communication and expectations, as I've said, is a real key enabler of success, and it is one of the most, it sounds like it's really easy, and it is one of the most obvious things that is often missing. Performance management needs to be an ongoing process, and we have a system that we use which is 6 monthly. So we work on 6 monthly performance management cycles. So at the start of the year or the start of the performance management cycle, what happens is the employee is sat down and given really clear expectations about what they're accountable for, so what their job is. This is your job role profile, so this is what you're accountable for doing. What their objectives are, so in this period, here are the things I particularly want you to focus on. So that could be a project, it could be an area for improvement, whatever it is. And here are our organisational behavioural standards that I expect you to demonstrate at all times, that I expect every employee to demonstrate at all times. So there's 3 components to it, which in itself sums up what you do and how you do it. Okay? That then becomes the structure for monthly one-to-ones. And in those monthly one-to-ones, you're reviewing how the person is doing against those set out performance standards. You're identifying where there's training gaps, you're identifying where there's needs, you're identifying where the person's doing really well so you can praise and recognise, you're identifying where the person's not doing so well so you can put remedial action in place. At the end of the 6 months, you then review their performance and summarise it. And that meeting is the easiest meeting you have as a manager because there's no surprises in it. Because if you've done your one-to-ones and you've done feedback, that meeting is going in and filling the boxes in. If it's the first time you're giving somebody feedback on their performances in that meeting, it's too late. So you haven't given the feedback timely. So you review it, you assess it, you set it up for the next 6 months. The accountabilities stay the same because it's the job hasn't changed, the objectives might adjust. You're now working on a different project. Or there's a different focus for us. It might be a milestone within a longer project. So clear performance expectations. So you have to tell them what you expect, and they have an obligation and you have a right to expect that they will meet your performance expectations. However, if you're trying to do that through osmosis, that you know what they want, you know what you want, but you have never told them, then it's going to be very difficult to manage them against it. If you come to us and say, right, we've got an underperformance issue, we need to manage somebody down a capability route, first question you'll get from us is, what's the objectives? Show me the one-to-ones. Show me the conversations you've had so far. What have you done? If you go, oh, well, I had a conversation with him at the water cooler on a week ago. Well, he's got a job description, so he knows what I expect. Then we're going to say to you, right, we can absolutely manage this person in terms of capability, but the first things we need to do is these things. You need to get those in place. You want to get trust in your relationship with your employees as quickly as you possibly can, and that comes about honesty. It also comes from you creating an environment where people can be honest. So if you have an environment where people are honest and then it's used against them, or people are honest and then it's talked about, or people are honest and then it's never responded to, you will not get people stepping forward. So honesty comes from the culture and the environment that you create to enable your honesty to come forward. If people come forward with suggestions, it might be the most ridiculous suggestion in the world. You know, if you've asked people for ideas and they come up with it, I think we should all wear Mickey Mouse ears on a Friday. Okay? It's a silly suggestion. So you're not going to do it. But if you just go, oh, what a silly suggestion, and never respond to the person, then they think, all right, well, why should I suggest anything? And the next idea might be the thing that saves you £1 million in the next year. So instead, you would look at it and go, okay, well, we've considered your suggestion about Mickey Mouse ideas. Whilst we think it's an interesting idea, we don't think it's practical and feasible, you know, we're not going to do it. But thank you for the idea. It's a much different way of engaging somebody. So honesty needs to be enabled, and people need to know that they can be honest in a trusted environment. What else? What else do you expect?
A consistent approach?
Yeah, consistency from everyone. Yeah, so consistency. Consistency against what? How do you degree?
Good consistency as opposed to a bad consistency.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So you need to set what you want it to be and then ask people to be consistent against it. So typically from a HR angle, you're being consistent against your employee handbook, your employee culture, you know, your policies, things like that, that people are being treated fairly and consistently. You don't want consistency of bullying. Yeah, so set it and then create consistency and expect consistency. It's really important, that one. And it's really important you give people feedback. I always say, I say this in every management training that we do. So if you ever come to management training with us, I'm going to apologise because you'll hear this a few times. There's a point in time, and it's a very short time period, where if somebody is underperforming, okay, there's a point in time that that person stops underperforming and the manager starts. Because if I'm the manager of that person and that person's underperforming for a number of weeks or months, okay, and I am not doing anything about it, I'm not having conversations, I'm not recognising it, and I'm not giving feedback, then that is accepted. That is an accepted standard of performance. So that person is no longer underperforming. But I am. Because I am the one who's accepting it and not doing my job. So then you've got to, you know, as a leader, you've got to then go in and say, okay, there's an underperformance issue here with manager, and we still need to address the underperformance issue with this person because we're not culturally going to accept that. And a lot of organisations where they have underperformance, it's normally cultural underperformance, I call it. It's like an accepted level of underperformance that spirals downwards. So culturally it's acceptable to perform at that level. So you've got to change the culture, not necessarily individuals, does that make sense? Or not the kind of people management team with a cape on to come in and solve all your problems. HR's role in most organisations in today's world, and certainly the role that we would take, is to support the managers to make the right decisions. Actually, I always say this to managers, HR aren't even there to make the decisions. They're there to enable you to make the right decision. We don't make decisions. We'll advise you, we'll direct you, we'll stop you walking off the edge of a cliff if you're about to do something stupid, of course we will. But actually what we want to do is enable you to make the decision that's right for you, right for the business, and right from a legislative point of view. So what do we mean by fair?
The way that you are with all of your employees, even though they're individual, that you're showing that you're fair in terms of your approach towards them.
Yeah, okay, so one of my biggest gripes with the Equality Act is the word equal. Because in order to treat people fairly, sometimes you can't treat them equally. So it's not about treating everybody the same. It's about treating people individually in a framework that means people are being treated consistently and fairly. So I might make a reasonable adjustment for somebody with a disability, which means that they work less hours, or they come in a little bit later, or they, you know, whatever it is. That probably wouldn't be a feasible, reasonable adjustment, but you know what I mean, as an example. And actually, by doing that and not doing it for somebody else, that is fair. So sometimes we get hung up on equality as being about equal, and actually equality is sometimes about doing things differently for different people to enable fairness, and it's a bit of a contradiction. So wanting to work, so work ethic is a really, really interesting one, and wanting to learn and develop, so that proactivity piece. One of the challenges sometimes you have on capability is sometimes people are very good at just doing enough to keep themselves on the right side of things. So they just kind of, you know, if this is the line of performance that I need to do, some people go, right, I'm going over here. I'm going to exceed that, and I'm going to really push myself forward. I'm going to do more. And some people go, this is the line, is it? It's right here, is it? Okay. Am I on it? Okay, I'm on it. Oh, I'm over it a bit, hang on. Right, I'm on it. And those sort of employees are really difficult to manage because they're just doing enough, but they're not quite pushing forward. Arguably there's a values issue there, there's potentially a behavioural issue there, so you've really got to get underneath that and try to resolve it. Now there is an argument that says if everybody performs at your minimum standard, your business will operate. The bit that this kicks into is where people are deliberately staying the minimum standard, and sometimes they're just like, if you're watching them, oh, I'm on minimum standard, look at me, I'm performing, I'm great. Oh, you're not watching us anymore? I'll have a little wander over here. Look at me, now I'm operating at 75%, but you're not watching me. Oh, watching us again, hang on, here's 100%, I'm back. That to me then becomes a conduct issue, and that happens a lot. So if somebody does enough and does it consistently, there's an argument to say you need some of those people in your organisations, and then you need some of the people to move forward. But the people who are consciously going just enough, just, right, I'm just on it. And then when you watch me, I'll do it, and when you don't watch me, I'll choose not to perform, they're really challenging people to deal with. And that, at that point, the minute somebody can do it and chooses not to and goes through that cycle, it moves from being a capability issue, it moves being about their ability to do the job, even though it's a performance issue, but it moves to being a conduct issue because they are making a decision about how they're going to perform. And it all comes down to you knowing what you want from your people and them knowing what you want from them, and then it works from that. So what other expectations did you come up with? So if you make a judgment on somebody, if you judge, it's a bad thing because it's based on emotion, assumptions, and not on fact. If you describe how somebody has performed or not performed, it's based on fact, and fact is what's going to help you move forward. We see a lot of grievances. I mean, grievances and disciplinaries. These are very, very emotional times. Grievances in particular are very hard to deal with. I'd rather do disciplinaries than grievances because grievances are very emotive, and often there's not a solution. It's just, he said this, she said this, I don't like this, he feels, you know, it's very emotional. Your job as a manager is to take the emotion out of these situations as much as you can and boil it down to fact. And the amount of disciplinaries we see, where again we've gone in afterwards or we've been brought in afterwards, and the disciplinary is being done on emotion. So I assume this, so therefore the action I'm taking against the person is this. That's not going to stand up in court. The judge is going to go, show me the notes from the investigation. Okay, so the notes say this, but you've made an assumption that there was no malice intended, but the notes don't say there was no malice intended. You've made a judgment. Straight away the decision isn't a valid decision anymore because it's not based on fact. So this is why discipline and grievances, and more importantly than discipline and grievances, is investigations. Investigations are your most important part of any of those processes. If you do a good investigation, those bits are easier. I'm saying they're easy, they're easier. If you do a really poor investigation, these bits, the person will wrap you up and you'll end up in court, potentially. Sometimes we work in busy environments, so we're really, really good at telling people when they're not doing something. you know, the production figures are down, or this is happening, or that's happening. So we're really good at jumping on the stuff that's not happening. But we forget, and it is forget, it's not intentional often, but we forget to go and say to people, thank you very much, you've done a great job, well done. Thank you for staying back. Thank you for proactively just going and sorting it. So there's that side as well. So thank you is, in some ways, more important than a bonus. Because people will still get bonuses and leave because they feel unappreciated. And remember, really good feedback can also be telling them where they're falling down. So really good feedback is that I'm being really honest with you and I'm helping you develop. It might be that you support them to go on a course, you support them to go on a qualification, you know, you invest in them in a different way that allows them to develop in their role and to develop in their profession as who they are. Some people don't want to train staff because they think, oh, I'm training them to leave. They'll leave anyway. You're actually training them to stay. I think it's Richard Branson who said, yeah, Richard Branson always says, I train people so they can leave because I know they'll want to stay. So, you know, never worry about losing somebody because you've trained them. They'll probably stay because you've trained them. If it comes back to this thing about communication and consistency, if you can get that in your organisation, you are a step on the right direction. And it's often the things that let people down. Setting performance objectives. So who's heard of SMART? Yeah? So ignore it, get rid of it. Who uses it effectively, really, truly? It's one of these stupid things that you learn at college that nobody uses and nobody does, and it means absolutely nothing. Okay? So I bet you weren't expecting to hear that on a management training course.
It's a bit of a relief, actually.
Yeah, we can bin it. What I should have done is had a bin and we could have burned SMART. We could have put it in and had a ritual burning of SMART. I'm not saying SMART's wrong. I think the principles behind it around specific, you know, being specific and all the rest of it. But SMART as a tool, I've never seen anybody use it effectively in any organisation, in any country in the world that I've ever worked with. Let's get rid. Instead, we do need to make sure that we set really good objectives. So this is what I think it's about. So it's about really making sure, yeah, keep going, really making sure that whatever the objective is has a really clear statement of performance required. So what I mean by that is, what is the person expected to do specifically? So if you say to me, you need to run a production plant. Okay, great. Well, that's not very detailed. That's not a real clear level of performance. If you say to me, you need to run a production plant to this degree of efficiency, that becomes more specific. It becomes more of a performance measure. It then needs to have the standard at which that performance needs to be delivered at. So that's what I've just said. So what is the standard? What is the measure of success? And then the last thing is the conditions under which this should be performed. And that can often be time or context. Okay? So the idea behind this is, and I'm not advocating this is how you would do it, but the acid test of this is if you write an objective for a team member down and you gave it to them on a piece of paper and you never spoke to them again, you walked away, you never spoke to them again, do they understand from that objective exactly what is required of them? If the answer is no, it is not a good objective. End of. If the answer is yes, they know the standard they should be doing it, they know when, they know the context, it's a good objective. So here's an example. So it's a bit of a silly example, probably not one that you would use, but to be able to successfully play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star in full on an electric guitar within 3 weeks, and that's the date of when that needs to be done. So the performance is to play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. The standard is it needs to be the full thing, not the verse, and it needs to be done successfully. So successfully means that it's accurate. So I might have even put with 100% accuracy in to make that even better. So the standards we've got, and then the conditions it needs to be performed in. Well, it needs to be played on an electric guitar, not just on any old guitar, because I might just get my ukulele out and do it on that. I don't know whether that's harder to play than an electric guitar, to be fair, but it might be. And the date. So if I said to you, there's your objective, you're all very clear on what you need to do. How you do it is a different conversation, of course it is. But if that's within your job description, you're very clear on what you need to do. So if we get to this date and you can't play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, and you've done nothing about learning to play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, then it's reasonable that I would be able to have a conversation with you that would look at why. Yeah? So another question for you is, do all of your people have objectives that very, very clearly define what you expect of them, using those three elements? And you have permission to burn smart.